gospel reading is printed for you on your insert if you'd like to follow along. Though the disciples struggle with Jesus' nature and identity, they receive the promise that they too will be identified with God and God's mission. Though he must leave them now, Jesus promises the coming of the advocate whom God will send to comfort and remind them. A reading from the gospel according to John. Philip said to Jesus, Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. Jesus said to him, Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and you still do not know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, Show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you I do not speak on my own, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. But if you do not, then believe me because of the works themselves. Very truly I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do it. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate, to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him, because he abides with you, and he will be in you. This is the gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. For 2,000 years, as Christians have gathered to celebrate the feast of Pentecost, to remember and perhaps experience again the outpouring of the Spirit. What would happen if God answered our prayer in that hymn? Come now, Holy Spirit. And as the church has gathered for 2,000 years to ask that the Spirit comes, they have read this story of Babel. They have linked the two stories. At Babel, they go from speaking one language to speaking many languages and not understanding one another. On Pentecost, there is a miraculous phenomenon where each hears and understands despite the multiplicity of languages. Some have suggested that what happens at Babel is reversed at Pentecost. But such an understanding is, I would suggest, to misunderstand the connection between the stories. First, there is great similarity between Babel and Pentecost. In both events, God comes down. God enters into our existence in a disruptive way. In both stories, there is a multiplicity of languages. Whatever happens at Pentecost is not that they all spoke the same language, but that there was an understanding in the midst of a validation of the different languages. At both Babel and Pentecost, they spoke multiple languages. Finally, at Babel, God intervenes to cause confusion. In Pentecost, God's intervention causes confusion. The pattern in the stories is the same. God intervenes, there are multiple languages, there is confusion. Furthermore, the flow in both stories is from unity to diversity. We will return to that last point later. With that being said, what I would like to do for the remainder of our time this morning is to focus our discussion on Babel. I want us to look at the story of the people in the city and the tower. Perhaps we can keep Pentecost visible in our peripheral, but I hope that by looking to Babel we will encounter the Spirit in a Pentecostal way. What are the questions we have about the story? I know my questions, but before I share them, I was interested if any of you have any questions raised by the story of Babel. No questions? Going once? Going twice? We'll rely on my questions, I guess. Here are some of my questions. Is God against humanity? Is God threatened by human success? If God creates multiple languages, and those language barriers create conflict and misunderstandings that lead to conflict, are those misunderstandings God's fault? Do the people sin? Is God punishing? There are more, but that's a good start. One of the big questions around this text is whether or not God punishes the people. Regardless of their intention, it's hard to believe that God feels threatened by humanity. It's worth pointing out that as the people build their big tower, God has to come down to see it. It's a little bit of a joke in the text. Furthermore, if God did not like towers at this prehistorical moment, did that change with the industrial era? With even bigger and more impressive skyscrapers, missions to Mars, international space stations, if God was trying to prevent something then, it certainly seems like God has stopped caring about whatever it was. Many of the Jewish scholars point out that the problem that God comes down to solve is not that the people were building a tower, but that they are building and living in a city. As opposed to God's direction to humanity at creation to fill the earth, these people are comfortable and settled. They are not going anywhere. They are not filling the earth. So, the sin of the people is that they want to settle down and live close to mom and dad. Is the problem they do not fill the earth, but settle down in a place where they are comfortable? As one who lives a nomadic life, preaching to folks who have lived nomadic lives, I want to be careful from accepting that position too quickly. Bottom line, one of the readings of Babel is that the people do not fill the earth, and so God disperses them so that they do. Another reading focuses on the divine language of multiplicity. If we pay attention to the text, we might notice that the first person plural cohort, as spoken by God, appears only twice in the text. It appears in Genesis 1:26, when God says, "Let us make humankind in our image." And again, here at Babel, when God says in verse 7, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language." These two moments are meant to mirror each other and help to frame the narrative. What starts in creation ends at Babel. Although this is helpful, I'm not sure that it completely helps us understand the meaning in the text. What was the problem at Babel? What is God trying to accomplish? Is it a continuation of creation, or is it some kind of refutation? We have framed the story as the end of the prehistory. The story starts with creation and ends with Babel. But there is also a connection to what happens next in the story. The people of Babel sought to make a name for themselves. As Genesis shifts, we come to the story of Abram, who will become Abraham, And we are told that God promises to make Abraham's name great. What the people sought to do at Babel, to make a name for themselves, God does for Abraham as a gift. That is Babel in context. It ends one section of Genesis and in another way prefaces the following. Although some hints at meaning can be derived from this context, let's see if there's any other meaning we can find. One of the most important things I read this week was an article by John Strong. Strong engages in dialogue with those who argue that what happens at Babel is not punishment. He points out if punishment is not the right word, that what happens is not positive. He argues that the primeval history starts with humanity created in God's image, and then is followed by a shattering of that image at Babel. The choice is then made to select one piece of that image, that is, one nation, to be made anew into the divine image. Given the framing to the story as the end of one section, the beginning of the next, that makes sense. And I find Strong's reading compelling, and I share it with you. However, it leaves me with other questions. If humanity is rejected as the image of God, are we wrong to say that every human being is a child of God? Just Israel. What are the implications for accepting that what happens at Babel is the shattering of the image of God in humanity? Strong is onto something here, and his reading is one of the best of the story. But I can't follow him because the implications of that reading, at least from where I sit, are too problematic. There is still another way to read the story of Babel. What if God does not punish the people, but like a caring parent, does for them what is in their best interest? To Strong's point, this can involve discipline. It can include a shattering of sorts. The key here is the parent's motivation. Is it anger or loving concern? Is it like an intervention for a child struggling with addiction? Is it about the child's best interest or the parent's best interest? Is it meant to reinforce the divine image in humanity or rescind it? Within this framework, we can understand that the sin of the people is their primary motive to promote cultural homogeneity with a singular language and unified culture, serving as prerequisites for the gentrification of a prime piece of post-flood era real estate. The Babel narrative signifies an archetypal example of misplaced totalitarian utopianism, indicating that the unity that was achieved through the common task of constructing a state-of-the-art city metropolis and erecting a tower of unparalleled historical magnitude represented a deceptive and ultimately meaningless harmony. Rather than promoting a morally advanced society founded on shared purpose and altruistic love, the mission of the multitude acted merely to promote an emotionally stagnant culture based upon blind conformity and technocratic proficiency. Before we go any further, we should stop there for just a minute. Because when I read the Babel narrative summarized like this, I feel as though I'm reading an analysis of our culture. I hope this is obvious to you as well. We do not need to look far and wide to to find examples of an emotionally stagnant culture based upon blind conformity and technocratic proficiency. The good news of Babel is not that God judges. I would say, in contrast to Strong, it's not even that God chooses Israel or calls Abraham. I would say that the good news is that God's prescient intervention of dispersing the multitude served to discourage blind obedience to regressive, collectivistic thinking in the service of promoting cultural diversity and individual difference. What is shattered is not the image of God in humanity, but humanity's vision of totalitarian conformity. The good news of Babel is that it discourages us from living lives of blind obedience to aggressive collectivistic thinking, and that when we listen and live accordingly, our lives, individually and communally, are healthier and happier. While being of one language and one mind initially appears as tolerance and unity, it is in fact representative of a unity without diversity, and bespeaks a standardized, culturally stagnant society that serves as a template for a one-party system that is a totalitarian in action and absolute in form. God's ultimate dispersion of the multitude sets the scene for cultural diversity on a group level and promotes psychological individuation on the personal level. This is not to say that God is opposed to unity. The Bible is full of calls and portraits of unity, not the least of which is the call to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, because we have been called in the one hope of our one calling, and because there is one Lord, one faith, one baptism. But even that call in the letter to the Ephesians points us toward the realization that God's unity is different from the forms of unity demanded by totalitarian regimes, empires, and far too many other social collectives. For immediately, we are told that to each one grace is given in a unique way. Rather than seeing Babel and Pentecost as opposed to one another, or Pentecost as the reversal of Babel, we do well to see them as echoing one another. At Babel, God intervenes to confuse a false, harmful, totalitarian unity and promote diversity. At Pentecost, God intervenes in a way that undercuts the unity demanded by the Roman Empire and promotes the unity realized in diversity. We started to think about Babel by asking some questions. I would like to suggest, as we close, we do well to stay with the questions. Given the value of the narrative places on diversity, and given the revelation of divine desire for diversity, how can we distinguish what is unity and not uniformity? How can differences be diversity, but not divisive? Is it easy to tell? When I work for unity, am I unwittingly stifling diversity? When I work for diversity, am I causing division? Let us live into those questions as we seek to be faithful to the God revealed to us in these stories. Faithful to the Spirit who is always already at work in and through the cultivation of our diversified unity and unified